to Robot Unicorn, hosted by my parents, Jess and Scott. I hope you enjoyed the episode.
Hey friends, today we have an incredible guest. This is someone who I have been waiting and so looking forward to talking to. Her name is Dr. Pooja Lakshmin, and she is a board-certified psychiatrist, a best-selling author, and a leading voice in women's mental health. And she specializes in the intersection of self-care, motherhood, and systemic change. So this conversation was so good. Honestly, one of my favorites so far. We talked a lot about what it actually means to take care of yourself as a parent when you still have all the demands, and how self-care really is not just about like, go get your nails done or go take a bubble bath and then come home to your life that is still hard and chaotic and tricky. Dr. Pooja graduated from the University of Pennsylvania with a BA in Women's Studies and the biological basis of behavior, which is just a fascinating thing to have your bachelor's in. She received her MD from Jefferson Medical College and did her psychiatry residency at Stanford and George Washington University. She is passionate about empowering women to reclaim their agency, challenge societal norms, and cultivate authentic self-care practices rooted in their values, which is just, it was part of our conversation today, and I loved that part of our conversation so much. Her first book, which was Real Self-Care, Crystals, Cleanses, and Bubble Baths Not Included, amazing subtitle, was an NPR Best Book of the Year, and she has another book that's going to be coming out called Quantum Shifts, A Guide to Surviving Life's Big Changes. Dr. Pooja is incredible. I could have talked to her for hours and hours. This conversation that you're about to hear came at a time when I really actually needed to talk about self-care, and I really can't wait for you to listen in. So without any further ado, let's talk to Dr. Pooja. Hi, Pooja. Welcome to Robot Unicorn. We're so happy to have you here today.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Truly, I've been really looking forward to this conversation. I was telling Scott, who often is on these episodes with me, but I was telling him this morning, like, I actually have the perfect conversation happening today on the podcast. And I was telling him how I have a self-care expert coming on and how this is just really good timing. And I was just telling you off air that my book is due tomorrow. And so I've just been under a lot of stress, but also it's May right now. And anyone who has a kid in school in May knows that it's also very busy. And so yesterday, I think I had a moment where I'm like, I have to get this book done. I have my clients, all these other things. And then I looked at my email and I think there was 6 emails from school. And I was just like, how do we do it? Right. And what does it actually look like to take care of yourself when you have all these things on your plate? And what I was struggling with yesterday and what I thought would be a nice kind of segue into our conversation today is so many times for parents or working individuals or whoever you are, you have all these things and you can't necessarily take them all off your plate. You still have to do them. And I know that that's something that you talk about because when you talk about self-care, it's not like, oh, just go take a bubble bath or go get your nails done. So I'm curious if you could kind of talk about that work and what that looks like for you.
Yes. Well, first of all, bless you for being here to have this conversation with me the day before your book is due. And I do. I hope that this gives you a pause and also feels like taking a breath. My work is focused on having a deeper and more authentic conversation about self-care. Over the past 20 years, self-care has become something that is so commercial and commodified, and it, tries to seduce us that if you just take a trip to Sephora or you get a massage or you do a juice cleanse, that somehow that's going to magically take away all of the mental load that we hold as parents, all of the different responsibilities that are on our plate. One of the things that I always like to say is that you can't meditate your way out of a 40-hour work week with no childcare.
Exactly.
Right. And I say to my patients, I take care of patients. I'm a psychiatrist. I think about childcare actually as a vital sign, because when you don't have childcare, your body is immediately in a state of fight or flight. But that's a different conversation. I think, for what you're saying with May and a book deadline and all the different things that you hold, I can definitely empathize. I have 3 kids. And what I think about is, as working parents, as people who are caregivers, we are operating probably 90% of the time in fight or flight. right? You're just kind of like in that operation mode, jumping from thing to thing. And then you see in your email all of those notes from school. And the way that I think about real self-care is being able to step out of that just for a brief second, getting out of that fight or flight mode and being able to look at yourself and your life, take a breath and kind of say, okay, what's important right now? Which of these things are actually a priority? What really matters? A week from now, a month from now, a year from now, which of these things are going to actually feel like they made a difference? Because when you're in fight or flight, every single thing feels like it's hugely urgent and hugely important. And that's the dangerous piece. That's the piece that really gets you in trouble, because then you lose your capacity for being able to discern and being able to actually make authentic decisions. Because real self-care really is about how you make decisions in your life.
Yeah, I think that's such a good piece for me. And I'm sure for all the parents listening too, it's like you have all these things come your way. And when you're in fight or flight, everything feels more important than the last, right? And so I think that was me reading those school emails yesterday, right? Like there's a field trip, there's a pizza day, I have to give $5 here, right? And it's just like, okay, but if I can take a step back and look, okay, big picture, is it okay if we, maybe we miss this event, but I can get this done so that when summer holidays comes, I have more time, and trying to look big picture instead of just taking every single thing that's coming at you. I think that's huge. Tell me about, and I'm curious, how did you get into self-care as a book that you wanted to write as part of your profession? Because I absolutely love your approach and I think it's so needed, but I'm curious how you got here.
Yeah, for me, it definitely was a personal journey and a professional journey. On the personal side, I'm a physician. I've been through burnout probably more times than I can even admit. But working in mental health, working in medicine, I came up in this culture of just pull your stuff up by your bootstraps, keep going, keep going, keep going. And I realized at some point that wasn't working for me and that I needed kind of a more sustainable way to think about taking care of myself. And around that same time, this was like 2015, 2016, I graduated my residency from GW and started my practice focused on women's mental health. And this was, I think, kind of like peak wellness time, because I started to have more and more patients who were coming in and they were like, Pooja, Dr. Lakshmin, like I'm stressed out, I'm burnt out, I'm not eating well, I'm not sleeping well. And I feel like it's my fault because I have the meditation app. I know I'm supposed to go to yoga, right? But at the end of the day, when I'm done working and the kids are in bed and the kitchen's closed, like all I can do is just doom scroll or sit on the couch and watch Real Housewives. Like I don't have the capacity to do anything that requires my brain. And I found myself saying over and over again, like, this isn't your fault. This isn't your fault. Like our system is not structured for real self-care. It's not structured for parents, for mothers, like even just talking about the end of school and the fact that we have this huge summer break where people have to figure out what to do with their kids. It's crazy making. And we still live in a country that doesn't have federally mandated paid parental leave. 30 million Americans don't have health insurance, right? Like these are structural issues. So it's not something that you can just like juice cleanse your way out of. But then the conversation becomes, okay, well, if these are larger issues, then what can I do? It's hopeless. The problem is outside of me. And my approach with real self-care is that real self-care is about an internal process. It's about how you make decisions and how you decide to spend your time and your energy. And if we make self-care something that's personal, then it has a chance to lead to collective change. But if self-care stays commercial, if self-care stays as a trip to Sephora, then we have no chance of getting there. In my book, I talk about a woman who was pregnant with her third child and her husband had never taken paternity leave, like his company didn't offer it. And her self-care, her real self-care was setting a boundary with her husband and saying, look, like I need you to at least ask for parental leave. Like they might say no, but I need you to be willing to ask. And that was a boundary for her. And that was her giving herself compassion and using her agency and her voice in her relationship. And her husband did ask and they said, yeah, you know what? We should be offering parental leave believe like we're big enough now. This is a benefit we should have. And that change applied to all the workers and employees. But she wasn't trying to be like an activist or an advocate. She was just trying to, well, really like to not get divorced. So that's what I mean when I say like self-care, if we make it something that's personal, then it has a chance to impact things at a wider level. But it really takes these 4 principles that I talk about: boundaries, compassion, values, and power. And it's really about how we talk to ourselves.
Oh, I love so much of what you're saying. And I see this in my clients as well, right? I clearly remember this one client, a mom of mine, coming in, and she's just like, Jess, if one more person asks me to take a bubble bath or tells me to take a bubble, like I'm going to lose my mind. Cause she's like, I take a bubble bath and there's like kids' toys in there and I go out and my kids are still screaming, like, this is not going to solve my problem. And I'm like, you're right.
And it speaks to what you were talking about earlier too, where everything feels so overwhelming, like just the story about the bubble bath. Like I can totally relate. Our master bathroom is full of kids' toys right now. You need to be able to step out of that chaos to be able to like actually hear yourself think and feel.
Let's say you're coaching someone through this and they're struggling. I'm thinking about a lot of our listeners who I know they're here because I hear their stories all the time, right? Of like, even let's say in parenting, like, yeah, I want to, let's say, learn how to help my child with impulse control better. I want to do these things, but I'm already so overwhelmed and I don't know how to build that into my day. Do you have any tips or like things that you do when you're helping someone just start real self-care for the first time and they've never done this, kind of like taking a step back before?
Yeah. So the first step is boundaries. And I know for a lot of people that sounds really scary because for so many caregivers, mothers, you're constantly giving and giving. And the idea of saying no feels almost impossible. But my take on boundaries is actually a little bit different because I don't think that a boundary is always saying no, because no always comes with a cost. Just like you were talking about earlier, like there's all these different responsibilities that we have as parents. So you can't just drop everything and be like, peace out. I'm not going to like pick my kid up from school or, I think of a boundary as the pause. You pause when you get a request or when something comes in, and then you have 3 options: yes, no, or negotiate. And negotiate could mean ask questions, like how much is it going to cost? What day of the week is it on? Like, do the kids need to bring their own food, right? Things like that, where you're getting more information about, is this doable, instead of blindly just saying yes. And if you find yourself in a situation where you do really want to say no, but you feel like the cost of no is too high, whether that cost is emotional or financial or interpersonal, then what you do is you make a note for yourself and you say, what do I need to do operationally so that 6 months from now, I can be closer to saying no? And that becomes more of a strategic conversation. That's something you can take to your therapist. You can take it to your coach. You could take it to your book club, whatever. It's like, it's a place where you actually can think more objectively and strategically about your life, as opposed to just thinking in terms of guilt or shame. Like you were mentioning, the parent who's really trying to help their kid work on their behavior. If you are coming at it from a place of, I'm not doing enough, I'm not being a good parent, that means that you're already coming from a place of shame, and that just isn't going to be helpful in the long run.
Yeah, I love how you're taking the shame out of it. You're saying, let's look at it like bigger perspective. Let's think about our values. And hey, if we have to say like yes to something we want to say no to right now, okay, so how are we going to make changes so that 6 months from now, maybe we can actually say that no we want to say? That feels really realistic for parents who are just trying to figure this out for the first time.
And I think, especially as parents, one of the places I've seen this show up quite a bit is in kids' activities.
Yes.
So I had a patient a few weeks ago who was telling me about, her son who was like in kindergarten, and he had an activity every single day of the week. It was like a basketball practice or something that went until 8 p.m. She was telling me her schedule, and I was just like, I don't like to use the word crazy, but I think I did say like, this is crazy, this is not okay. And I think that's a place where you really can use the pause and sort of think like, okay, yes, no, negotiate. Right now we're kind of locked into these things, but what do we need to do 6 months from now so that we can start to simplify? Because I think most parents that I work with are doing too much.
Absolutely. I have the same thing in the parents I'm working with, where sometimes we're looking at this burnout, exhaustion, or like I was saying, it's so hard to implement a new strategy, but then we look at life and it's activity every night of the week, birthday parties all weekend. And I'm sure you get it. I get it as a parent too. And I also am always trying to figure that out, right? What's the line between we want our kids to do these social things or whatever it is they want to do, but at the same time, we can't say yes to everything. It's so helpful to hear sometimes like, hey, it's okay to do less. And your kids are actually going to be better off for it too, if it means their parents not so burnt out and they can have some time at home, which is also helpful for them.
Yes, and to learn decision making too.
Yeah.
For them, you're modeling it.
Hey friends, so at pickup last week, our daughter asked Scott a truly kind of tricky question in front of her younger siblings. Scott was telling me that when he heard a question like this, he used to panic, but this time he had a plan. And he said to our daughter, "Thank you for asking. Let's talk tonight when we've got privacy." And that's a line that he learned straight from our new body safety and consent course at Nurtured First. So this new body safety and consent course is taught by me. So Jess, if you listen to this podcast, you know me. I'm a child therapist and a mom of 3, and I have taught body safety and consent education for years. This course takes all my years of experience teaching this education and gives you calm, age-appropriate language for body parts, consent, and boundaries. You'll learn how to teach your kids that no means no. You'll learn how to teach them to read facial cues. You'll talk about safe and unsafe touch, and you'll even teach them about their uh-oh feeling. There's guidance inside this course for the real life stuff, like tickling that goes too far, and even the difference between a secret and a surprise. We made this course at Nurtured First because research shows that body safety education helps kids speak up sooner, and we want that for our family, for Scott and I, but also for you. So check the course out at nurturedfirst.com/bodysafety, and to save 10%, use the code ROBOTUNICORN. And just full disclosure here, we are the creators of this course, and we're so proud of it. So I think about this conversation that we're having, and then the original reason I asked you on to talk about mistakes. And I think that it's all really, to me, it blends together into mistakes and the self-care are so connected. But I recently read your Substack article, which was called How to Not Make Mistakes Your Identity. And I right away sent it. I have a team of therapists who work for me, and I sent it to them because in our team supervision, right before I saw your article, we have been talking about this, about how to not be so hard on yourself when you make a mistake. Not only just as a clinician, but for our clients, because we see them being really hard on themselves, but also as parents, as most of us are parents too. And I was thinking about a mistake that I made and how I was compassionate on myself. I thought I would share that. And then I have so many questions for you about this. But recently I made a big mistake and I wrote down the wrong date for this thing that was really important for my daughter. And so in passing, I was talking to a friend of mine and she's like, "Okay, this big girls event. It's on this day." So I quickly put it on my calendar, but I never fact checked it. And so someone had given me the wrong date or I wrote it down wrong. I don't know. So we had it on the calendar. My daughter was so excited. She couldn't wait to go. The whole weekend we're talking about it. We get in the car, start heading over there. And I'm just like, I just want to double check something. Anyway, so I'm like, open the email, double check something. And I see it happened yesterday. Oh, and so she's with me like, "Mom, why is your face looking like that? What's going on?" She's 9. Like, "Why are you looking that way?" And I know I have to break the news to her. And I know, of course, she's going to be upset. And of course, that's fair. And I feel so bad because I knew how much she was looking forward to doing this. And it's not like, oh, it was next weekend. Like it had already happened. And I had to sit with that mistake that I made. And I know that obviously I'm not the only parent who makes these kind of mistakes. And when there's so many things on the go in terms of like the activities that your kids have, plus all the other things, of course you're going to drop a ball sometimes. So in those moments, how do you help parents not go down a spiral of like shame and guilt and beating themselves up for whatever mistake? Like that was one of many mistakes that I've made. But yeah, how do you help parents?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you sharing that example because I think all of us really feel we're there with you in the car. Like we all had a moment like that where it's like your stomach just drops. The thing with mistakes is that they become psychologically dangerous when we fuse them with our identity. Mistakes are a part of being human. Being human means to fail and to get back up, and to fail again, and to come back up. But when a mistake becomes who you are, when a mistake starts to define you, that's when we get into trouble. And so the way that I try and help my patients sort of reframe this or think about this differently is to hold mistakes lightly, kind of borrowing a little bit from some of that Buddhist language. Hold a mistake lightly. It's not something that becomes part of who you are. It's not something that becomes your identity, but it's something that happened. It was an event, it was an experience, but it's just one piece of a larger puzzle. We've been talking about using that word perspective. perspective is just so huge, especially in parenting, because when you care about someone, when you love someone, when you have a child, it's like you are just like narrowed in and so close. So it's so easy to forget the bigger picture. In that article for my Substack, for my newsletter, it was really focused on how the mistake itself is not the bad thing. Everybody makes mistakes, right? We all forget things, we all mess up, but it's how your nervous system and your brain makes meaning from it. And if you are the type of person, especially if you're a perfectionist, if you're a type A person, not that I know anything about that, your brain is kind of like always looking for evidence that you're not good enough or that you're messing up. So mistakes become kind of like a report card. You're looking at them like a grade. And that's kind of the wiring or like the automatic thinking that we want to interrupt.
Yeah, exactly. Like making your mistake your identity. We all are going to make mistakes as parents, as employees, like whatever your role is in life, you're going to make a mistake. And so when you make that mistake part of who you are as a person, it becomes really difficult to navigate and also difficult to separate yourself from the mistake that you're making. I have wrote down a quote that you had, which was, "The most damaging part of a big mistake isn't the screw up, it's what you make it mean about you afterward." So how do you work with parents or just anyone when they do start to make their mistakes their identity or they make it mean that they're failing? How do you help them start to get out of that cycle?
Yeah, one of the things that I find is that typically with mistakes, there's so many different layers of shame that you have to help a patient work through to even be able to talk about it. So I will sometimes have patients who I've been seeing for months before they kind of tell me really what happened or what's going on. Because that mistake, whether it's something really bad that happened at work and they got laid off or let go, or, something in their relationship, usually it's like buried so far down. The mistake that you shared was definitely something that like makes your stomach turn, but it's not like the type of thing where you're like, oh my gosh, my whole life is ruined. And sometimes there are people that have those experiences where it's like such a huge change in how they saw themselves that it becomes almost an indictment on them. And so basically like the way that, I guess, like to answer your question, how do we work with it? We have to go very, very slowly. We have to be really gentle with that experience and sort of like the person who's in front of me. It's not the type of thing where you can just be like, okay, we're going to talk about your mistake now. Right? It's like we are really coming to it on a really kind of winding journey. And then the process really is to sort of re-experience the mistake, to allow yourself to really go back there and let your body process it. In that article, I talk about metabolizing the mistake as opposed to kind of just like intellectualizing it. A lot of times I see patients who, they can talk about it. They can talk about how they lost their job, or they can talk about how something happened in their marriage, but they're not really there. They're not really actually connecting to the person they were that went through that experience. And so a lot of the work actually psychologically is helping you feel safe enough to go back there. And then once you're back there, really start to allow yourself to believe that this is not who you are. And it's not something that has to define you. It's sort of like being able to make meaning from that experience and something that went wrong without having it feel like that's the only version of yourself.
I've seen that in so many people, that I know personally in my work who've made those kind of more life-altering maybe mistakes, or they've done something that doesn't align with their values. And it's maybe deeper than, okay, I forgot this party for my child, right? It's something that's impacted their family or their marriage or their work or whatever it is. And there's something that didn't feel like it aligned with who they were, and they were confused about how could I even do this thing? Those mistakes are really hard to work through. And I think as professionals, we have the opportunity to work with people through those mistakes. And like you said, doing it slowly, I think is really important and not just jumping straight in. But I was going to ask you, if for the people who don't know what this means, but you talked about intellectualizing it. Can you just explain that a little bit more for people who might not know what that means?
Yeah. So when we say intellectualizing, what we are referring to is a defense mechanism where you're thinking about the experience. You're kind of trying to solve it. You're using your problem-solving brain to explain it, but you're not actually feeling the experience and you're not embodying what you were going through. So there's sort of a disconnect when this happens. situations where your brain is processing it at kind of a high level, but your body's not totally connected to what's going on in your brain. And this is a common defense mechanism, especially for folks who are, like we said, perfectionistic, type A, high achieving. And I also want to just say it's not a bad thing. In many cases, it can be a healthy defense mechanism because it helps you get through if the mistake was something that was particularly traumatic. It helps you get through that time. It helps you cope. It helps you put yourself back together, so to speak. But it's usually after you're on the other side of a mistake, if we're talking about some of these bigger life-altering mistakes, even years after, that you're kind of able to finally look back and make that connection between the thinking about it and problem solving and kind of naming what happened and actually allowing yourself to feel some of the grief, to feel perhaps some of the anger or the confusion, and allow yourself to be in maybe even some of the contradictions that went on during that time. You know, you were talking about how a mistake can be an experience where you are behaving in a way that is not aligned with your values. That's what I mean by the contradiction, right? To be able to allow yourself to go back there and say, like, how did that happen? How did I do that? One of the other pieces here that I talk about actually in the newsletter is also like understanding and acknowledging the circumstances around a mistake. You know, when something, even just taking the example of missing the school event, allowing yourself to name like, okay, yes, I was juggling like 20 different things. And, you know, my other kid was sick and we didn't have childcare and school was closed and you were not operating in a vacuum. You were operating within a system that devalues the work that mothers do inside the home. And so it is not unusual for things to fall through the cracks because the system is set up for you to be a robot, but you're not a robot. You're a human.
Yes, exactly. And I think that helps you have compassion on yourself in those mistakes. Something that's helped me too, as just a mother who, of course, is going to make so many mistakes all the time. And my kids like to tell me about them, and that's fine, is that I actually had this conversation with one of my kids the other day. Like, I don't want to be a perfect mom. And they were like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, I don't actually want to be perfect all the time. Like, I want you to see that I make mistakes. I have times where I mess up. Sometimes I get frustrated about things, like there's too many dishes and then I clean them up. And then I'm like, I probably shouldn't have been that frustrated that there's that many dishes, because I want you to be able to someday have compassion on yourself too. And I want you to feel free to go ahead and make mistakes because that's just a part of life. And if you think I'm perfect all the time, well, then that's not going to be good for you either. And that's been a big thing that's helped me, at least as a mom, and at least for those kind of mistakes where, you know, I've lost my cool or I've forgotten something important, and to be able to say, hey, look, it's actually okay for my kids to see me as a whole human who actually does mess up, and then to see the repair process that happens after. And okay. And something you talked about in that article too is like finding meaning in the mistakes. And I'm wondering if you could speak to that a little bit too, about like, how do we find meaning in our mistakes, and can that help us reconcile sometimes when we do mess up?
Yeah, this is a big piece of kind of the metabolizing of mistakes that I talk about. It's one of the ways that you can kind of connect the intellectual with the embodiment, because meaning is something that is so personal and it's so diverse too, in terms of how you make meaning and what's meaningful to you. You know, for me, one of the things that I talk about, and I've talked about in my book, is that part of my journey through medicine was I left for a little while and went into this wellness group and ultimately felt like it was a mistake and came back to medicine. And for a long time, that was kind of my big life-altering mistake that I had to come to terms with. And one of the big things was like kind of looking at, what did it mean? Did it mean that I was somebody who failed? Or did it mean that I was somebody who was foolish? Or did it mean that I was somebody who was curious? And that I was somebody who wanted to ask myself different questions and understand myself, understand the world in a different way. And I think where I landed is probably all of those things are true. All of those things are part of who I am. And that's, like you said, part of being a whole human being. That's part of being a whole person. And the way that I metabolize it for myself and the way that I think of myself then enables actually how other people treat me and how other people think of it. Because if I'm walking around feeling ashamed, or like this is something that needs to be in a black box, then that's something that other people also take away. Whereas when you've been able to kind of face whatever happened, face your mistakes, you can hold it lightly, like we said, and you are able to integrate it into your whole life or your whole sense of who you are as a person. And it, again, allows you to then be able to have this bigger, wider perspective. And that's something that, again, we're talking about working with clients, working with patients. It takes a long time. It does take a long time. I think it takes longer than people expect it to, because especially with something like a bigger mistake, you have to be really far outside of it until you can really come back and be able to look at it and touch it again. And so I think that's another place where we want to give ourselves more compassion that, hey, this process actually is going to probably take a little longer than you want it to. That doesn't mean that you're failing. It actually means that it's something that has to move slowly, because that's the only way for it to really work.
Yeah, I love that you bring that up, because I think sometimes, for myself and for my clients, you're like, okay, I'm going to go to therapy. I'm going to go do the work. And hopefully, in a month or so, I'll be fixed and I'll be ready to move on with my life. But it doesn't go quite so quick. And I think to give people the heads up that it does take some time, but that is important, that time that it takes. And thank you for sharing about your work, leaving and coming back. I think that is something that a lot of people can relate to in whatever way that, whatever that mistake is that someone feels like they made that really defined who they are and something that they regret, to be able to look back and reflect on what is the meaning in that. And something I really love that you said, and this has been just a big part of my own personal journey lately, is owning it. What does that mean for you, owning who you are or owning your mistake and being open about it? What does that mean for you?
Yeah. I think it actually connects to the concept of holding lightly. You're not broadcasting it. You're not confessing it. It's not something that needs to be on a sign, but it's also not something that you are hiding. It's something that's integrated as part of who you are. So it's something actually that people feel about you, because you have integrated these different aspects of who you are, of your life experiences, and you're able to just be with yourself and also just be present with another person without having to sort of steer either in avoiding that part of yourself or in actually directing in that part of yourself. And one of the things that I see actually with kind of our social media culture and sort of the way that our screens have evolved, I guess, or, just how we consume news and media, is that because of the way that the algorithms work, there's a lot more of broadcasting, sort of this happened to me, or I did this, and then I learned XYZ, and it happens quickly. The person hasn't necessarily had time to really digest and really metabolize what their experience was, but the algorithm rewards that because there's a shock value to it. And so I think actually owning is much more of a subtle process.
Yeah, I love that. And actually, I think that owning without it being broadcasted, on a billboard, I made this mistake and now this is me. And in a real genuine way where I've seen people who are saying they're owning their mistakes, but it becomes out very self-deprecating, making fun of themselves, in which sometimes that can be part of it, but also sometimes it's, another kind of coping skill. But I think it comes back to even self-care for me. And I'll kind of share something that I've reflected on a lot over the last few years. I used to be quite the people pleaser, and that led me to making mistakes, things that didn't align with my values, just to, keep the peace and keep everyone happy, which you can only do for so long until you can't. And typically for a lot of women I work with, that's after you become a mom and you have so many things on your plate and you can only please so many people, right? So for me, that journey of kind of becoming and owning who I was as a person without trying to change who I was for every person I was around, right? To be hey, this is me, this is Jess, this is who I am, actually really helped me take care of myself as well. And I'll share kind of what this has looked like, especially in the last year. My kids get older, they're school age now. There's certain things that I'm good at and I can do, and there's certain things that I'm just not. And so part of this for me has been you know what, I'm actually not going to be the mom that has homemade baked goods that I'm bringing to the bake sale. If I try to do that, it's going to be gross or it's going to be burnt and it's going to stress me out because I don't like to bake. And so I will happily pick something up from the store. My daughter loves to bake with her grandma and she will tell people yep, I bake them with grandma. My mom doesn't do it. But owning that for me and not putting that pressure on myself to be Jess, you have to show up perfectly to the bake sale and you have to show up perfectly. And everyone has to know that every school event and your kids will never miss something. Just being oh yeah, sometimes I forget things. And, that is just, it is what it is. Stepping into this is who I am and being okay with that. Actually, people don't turn you away and they don't say, oh, what a bad mother you must be for never baking for your kids. I don't know if that relates to self-care for you or if you have any insights on that as well.
Yeah, no, I mean, I appreciate you sharing that. I think it's so relatable for probably many different mothers that are listening.
Yes.
I know I don't bake either.
Okay,
I actually
good.
don't cook. My husband does all the cooking. It is not my skill set. And I think that it is an illustration of real self-care because it's your decision making. It's your boundaries. It's your compassion. It's your understanding for yourself. Not only is it not a place that you excel, it also sounds like what you're saying is it doesn't showcase your values as a parent in the way that is super important. There's other places in your lives that you're able to embody values that are important for you. And so I think that exactly like owning those things and again, not having it define you and not having it be something that you're up at night ruminating about is a nice example of sort of like what it means to really make these types of decisions and kind of accept them as well. And like accept yourself also.
Yeah. And I think for every parent, it's different, right? So for me, it's like, okay, there's so many things I'm just not good at and I'm very open about them. Like I'm not going to be the one baking. I'm probably not going to be able to volunteer for every class trip or everything that happens, but I am so happy to have my kids' friends over and I'm so happy to host them and to spend time with them or do a pickup or drop off. There's things I can do and there's things I'm not so great at. And what I have noticed is that when I show up authentically in my friendships and with the other school moms, then they can say, oh, I love that you can be really playful with the kids, Jess. That's not something I'm good at, but hey, I'm happy to do this. And so I think it does, and you were saying this earlier too, it becomes the social change when someone can embody it and start doing that as well.
Yeah.
So as we kind of wrap up, is there anything else that you really would love to share about mistakes or just self-care in general that we haven't covered yet?
You know, I think we've covered a lot of ground. I think my main sort of message that I want folks to really sit with is that so much of this work, whether we're talking about real self-care, whether we're talking about how you make meaning, whether we're talking about sort of integrating, it's really about like the conversation that you have with yourself and acknowledging that the conversation you have with yourself exists and is important and is actually the first place to make change.
I love that. And giving yourself in that conversation that you have with yourself, right? Holding that lightly, giving yourself that compassion to be like, I'm a whole human who makes mistakes, even sometimes big ones. And that's okay. And that doesn't make me a bad person. It just makes me a human. Thank you. Thank you for your work. It's so important. It's so meaningful. And I'm really glad that you were able to come and we could have this conversation today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure. And I hope to be back.
Yes, I hope you're back as well. Can you tell everyone where they can find you?
So I have a newsletter on Substack. It's called Real Self-Care and it's poojalakshmin.substack.com. And then I'm on Instagram at Pooja Lakshmin. You can find me there. And I have a new book that's coming out in the spring called Quantum Shifts. So we will be book sisters, Jess. They're coming out right at the same time. And it's all about how to handle change and how to deal with life's big changes. So yeah, you can find me in all those places. And if you're interested in how to handle change or how to make sense of change, I'll be talking a lot about that in my newsletter this fall and in my next book too.
Yes, we'll have to have you back once you're ready to start sharing about your next book because I'm already thinking about the questions about change and looking forward to that conversation too.
Awesome. Me too.
Thank you. Hey friends, thank you so much for listening to today's episode. We are glad that you are here. If you enjoyed today's episode and found it interesting, we'd really appreciate it if you'd leave a rating and a review. Scott and I actually sit down together and read them all. A 5-star rating helps us share our podcast and get these important messages out there. Thank you so much for listening, and we can't wait to talk to you again next time.